Good morning. Welcome to Conversation with Chris and Ethan. I'm Chris Lay.
I'm Ethan Rowling.
And I'm running for the office of Scott County Sheriff. Today we're going to talk a little bit about my military history.
Obviously, I know you, Chris. I know you've got 29 years of law enforcement experience, 32 years of public service, because you were in the military and you weren't always in law enforcement. Why don't you talk a little bit about when you joined?
So after graduating high school and working odds and end jobs, there was a significant event that happened in the Middle East. Saddam Hussein, dictator of Iraq, invaded Kuwait, and Desert Shield and Desert Storm kicked off. I felt that I had a higher calling. Growing up in a patriotic family, I thought, well, this is my time to go serve my country. So I went and joined the Army in September of 1990 and came home and told Mom and Dad, and 2 weeks later, I was off to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood.
What was your initial position in the military?
When I went in to see the recruiter, they basically said, hey, we have shortages in these fields. We really need combat engineers. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, if that's where you need people, put me there. So I signed all the paperwork and everything. And I was like, what's a combat engineer do? Well, they work with demolitions and explosives. So I was like, cool. Well, sounds good to me. So off to Fort Leonard Wood I went to do a one-station unit training, become a combat engineer.
Once you were all done with your training and you went to your primary unit, what'd you do from there?
I went to Germany. I was in Germany for 18 months, had 2 different duty assignments there, and basically I was a demolitions and explosives expert. Did a lot of work with landmine warfare at that time. After my tour in Germany, I went to Fort Carson, Colorado, and was a combat engineer doing the same thing at that location as well.
Where'd you go from there?
It was about time for me to re-enlist in the military. I wanted to change in my job, so I was like, well, let me try out this military police thing. So I re-enlisted with the option to go to Fort McClellan, Alabama, and attend military police school, and I became a military police officer.
So when you were done with your training, where'd you go?
My first duty assignment, I was in Korea and was a patrol officer performing law enforcement mission and training for a combat situation within the Republic of Korea. During that first tour in Korea, I got promoted to my first position as a first-line supervisor. I became a corporal and was a team leader. And then I got assigned to Fort Ritchie, Maryland, where I became a squad leader. Worked underneath the Joint Chiefs of Staff at Fort Ritchie and Fort Detrick, Maryland, where I was then promoted to sergeant and then promoted later on to staff sergeant, before I went back to Korea to be the training sergeant for a 100 personnel regional confinement facility working in corrections.
Where'd you go from there?
After my second tour in Korea, I wanted to be a drill sergeant. So I put the paperwork in and requested to go to Fort Leonard Wood to be a military police drill sergeant, and I was accepted into the program. So I went back to Fort Leonard Wood, and I was a drill sergeant for 40 months.
What does being a drill sergeant entail?
Basically, we are taking civilians straight off the street, and through a soldierization process, we are turning those civilians into soldiers to be prepared to endure some of the harshest realities in life so that they can go to a combat environment and perform their mission to ensure our freedoms and safety are secure at all times. When not in a combat environment, then we were training them to be military police officers so that they could enforce laws at the federal and state level, and, military laws as well as regulations.
So once you were done being a drill sergeant for the time, where'd you go from there?
While I was a drill sergeant, I got promoted to sergeant first class, and during my time as a drill sergeant is when the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Twin Towers happened in the Pentagon. Then the country was once again involved in conflict through Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. I was reassigned from Fort Leonard Wood and sent to Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, where there was a platoon in Iraq that needed a new platoon sergeant. So I went to Iraq and led a 24-soldier platoon that completed over 1,200 combat operations while in Iraq.
Was that your only combat tour?
No. Upon the conclusion of that tour, of course, we came back to the Schofield Barracks, and I briefly took up a position, was appointed as the acting first sergeant of the 25th MP Company, redeploying several other platoons from Iraq and Afghanistan, and then was moved to the 58th MP Company, where I trained up and prepared a platoon to deploy to Afghanistan, at which time the division commander, General Benjamin Mixon, pulled me from that unit to go over to division headquarters and work on his special staff to establish the 25th Infantry Division Provost Marshal's Office for military police operations for an upcoming combat tour in Iraq again, which we then later deployed to Iraq and was over there for 15 months on that tour.
So after that tour, where'd you go from there?
After that tour, we came back to Schofield Barracks, and then I went over to the police department on Schofield Barracks, where I was the police operations sergeant and the investigation supervisor for the entire community of 45,000 people.
And when you were done doing that, what'd you do next?
That completed my tour in Hawaii. I was then reassigned again back to Fort Leonard Wood, and because of my extensive combat and law enforcement experience, I was assigned as the branch chief for the Army Military Police School, responsible for all the instruction and training of law enforcement operations to new recruits coming into the military.
And how long did you do that for?
I was in that position for approximately 18 months, after which then the commanding general for the military police school reassigned me up to his special staff, where I was then an operations sergeant, basically responsible for all the training and task execution for the military police school. And in 2015, after completing my time with the military police school, I retired from the Army.
What'd you do after you retired?
After I retired, I knew my time in the military was complete, but I wanted to continue my service to the community and to the country. So I wanted to continue to build on my 21 years of law enforcement experience that I already had. So I applied for and was offered a position as a patrol officer with the Lebanon Police Department in Lebanon, Missouri, where I served that community for the next 3 years.
And why'd you stop serving there?
My wife had gone back to school to get her master's in nursing and became a nurse practitioner. And she was offered a job with the Iowa City VA Medical Center, which was always her dream to serve veterans, as she too was an Army veteran. So she accepted the position up in Iowa City. I stayed behind in Missouri for about 5 months until I was offered a job with the Scott County Sheriff's Office. And during that 5-month period, we sold off all of our livestock and sold our cattle ranch. And then I moved up here to Scott County, Iowa, so I could be with my wife and we could continue in our new careers.
Obviously, talking about all your military and law enforcement experience, you've got plenty of history behind you. What makes you want to run in this position? What makes you think that the leadership qualities you've picked up are going to help you?
I have received extensive training in the military as far as resource management, personnel management, and leadership. You can't lead people into a combat situation, and you can't lead people in a law enforcement profession if you don't understand what leadership's about. I believe my formal training in the military in leadership and my experience in leadership positions has prepared me to continue my leadership endeavors in the civilian community as well. And I believe doing that in a law enforcement aspect is what I was meant to do. I've seen numerous areas within civilian law enforcement, to include the Scott County Sheriff's Office, where I can make definitive changes to ensure that the agency is more efficient and more effective for the community that we serve.
Well, Chris, I appreciate you sitting down and explaining to me your history. I know that you have a personal philosophy on leadership that's pretty big in your campaign. Leadership is actually an acronym for you. You want to talk a little bit about that real quick?
The acronym that I used as my foundation was an acronym that was used in the Army to represent the Army values as they are today. I've expounded on that acronym a little bit, and I would like to talk about the values that I want to instill in the Sheriff's Office in order to implement and develop a leadership program within the Scott County Sheriff's Office.
Well, I hope everybody tunes in for those.
Have a good day, and we'll see y'all later.